There's a story which is told in Midrash, which is a collection of ancient Jewish commentary on the Hebrew Bible. Midrash is basically stories and elaborations and explanations and opinions about the stories in the Bible. And one of those stories is about a man named Nashon, who you probably never heard of. I hadn't. Nashon is only briefly mentioned in the Bible, a single reference to him in the book of Numbers, where he is simply called a leader of the Israelites, that tribe of people who escaped from Egypt and eventually became the Jewish people, whose story is told in the book of Exodus. In the Midrash version of the story, Nashon is the one who actually made the Red Sea part. And I'm sure you remember the story of the Exodus. The Israelites are enslaved in Egypt. God chooses Moses to be their leader, and then God sends 10 increasingly horrific plagues upon the Egyptians. Things like a frog epidemic and everybody getting painful, horrible boils. And with each plague, the Pharaoh says he'll let the Israelites go free so that God will have mercy and stop the plague. And then Pharaoh changes his mind. And finally, after the last horrific plague, which I won't even say what it is because there are children listening, Pharaoh seems to mean it, and Moses gathers up the people in a hurry and they all start walking. They get to the shore of the Red Sea, and Pharaoh changes his mind one final time and sends his armies after them. And the people, the Israelites, are stuck at this horrible, terrifying place with armies behind them and uncrossable waters ahead of them. And in the book of Exodus, it says that Moses raises his hand and God parts the waters. But in the Midrash version, which I actually like much better, Moses raises his hand and nothing happens. Nothing moves. Not the water, not the Israelites. And just as total panic is starting to set in, Nashon walks into the water. He takes one step in, nothing happens. So he takes another step in, and another, and another. Step by step, he walks into the water, and it isn't until he's like just over his head, the people watching from the shore, certain he's going to drown, and no doubt Nashon must have thought he was going to drown himself, when the water parts. And then the Israelites can walk through on dry land and make their way to freedom. Now, as far as I can tell, Nashon was really just a regular person, probably not a leader of the Israelites at all, because he's never mentioned before or after this story. But in my book, he's a hero. He's maybe even the most important person in all of the stories of the founding of the Jewish people, since without him, there would be no Jewish people, at least according to the biblical account of things. Nashon was the one who took that first step. Now, the Midrash doesn't tell us why he did it. Even if he knew how to swim, the Red Sea is 1,400 miles long and 220 miles wide. Maybe he had a tremendous amount of faith that God would do something, or maybe he just figured it was better to drown trying to get free rather than living in enslavement. The story just says he walked into the water. His name, Nashon, means powerful wave in Hebrew. And I think his power was in his courage. I think a lot about what it means to be brave these days. What does it mean for us to be brave at this moment in our country's history? What does it mean to be brave in our own lives, in our relationships, in our particular families, in our communities? What does it mean to be brave in our own hearts, in our own minds and souls? What does bravery look like, sound like, feel like in ordinary lives like our own? I'm pretty certain that bravery doesn't mean being unafraid. I'm pretty certain it means saying the words that we need to speak, doing the things that we feel called to do when we are afraid. I'm pretty sure it means taking that step into the water. I also think a lot these days about the writer Annie Dillard's famous words, "There is no one but us. There never has been. There's no one but us. There never has been." It is hard not to be waiting for our version of Moses to part the Red Sea for us. It is hard not to yearn for a great leader right now. Someone to tell us what to do, or even better, someone who will do it for us. Someone who will restore our country to sanity, protect the vulnerable, save our democracy. And leaders are emerging. There's no doubt of that. And they will continue to emerge in the years to come. Poets and writers and musicians and young social justice leaders of all kinds. But no single person is going to save us or anything, because really there is no one here but us, and it is going to take all of us. We have to be the ones who step forward into the water, even though we are afraid. That is the bad news I have to share with you this morning. But it's also the good news. Because like Nashon, we are just ordinary people. And ordinary people can do hard things. And ordinary people can be brave, especially when we do it together. Reverend Cameron Trimble, whose voice and weekly column of both practical and spiritual wisdom I have come to rely on, wrote this week, "Well, I'm doing fine except for the eye twitch. That is new. My head knows that in times of great upheaval, it is easy to feel powerless. When we look at the state of the world, deep divisions, unchecked corruption, a government in turmoil, it is tempting to believe that nothing we do will make a difference. The weight of it all is paralyzing. But spiritual traditions across time teach us that even the smallest actions taken with courage and consistency have the power to create lasting change. Even the smallest acts of courage matter." I believe her because everything I am reading about how we effectively resist what is happening in our country says that we need to refuse to give up or give in wherever and whenever we have the power to do that. That we need to use our voices to speak. That we need to keep believing in compassion and practicing inclusion. Rebecca Solnit, the American writer and historian and sociologist, is another voice I trust very much. And she also wrote about small acts of courage this week and how defending what and who we believe in will need to be woven into our everyday lives, into our conversations and our relationships. She believes that bravery, this ordinary, everyday bravery, is what can turn things around. This week, she wrote, each one of us will need to stand on principle as loudly as we can, whenever we can. Our voices can actually do a lot to preserve anti-authoritarian worldviews about facts and science and history and human rights and justice and inclusion. In this moment, it matters to just be a human being who believes and affirms that the climate crisis is real, that immigrants are vital to our economy and their rights matter, that trans people harm no one by their existence but face terrible harm, that diversity strengthens communities and our country, and equality is non-negotiable. Every person who does this makes it easier and safer and more encouraging for others to likewise dissent. As Lori said, courage is contagious. Solnit reminds us that the reason authoritarians are authoritarian is because they're unpopular and they have to use intimidation and fear and threat of force to get their way. They scare people into obeying. So refusing to obey wherever we can actually reveals how much power we still have. We have to name the cruelty when we hear it. We have to call violations of human rights by their true names. We have to refuse to pretend that what is happening right now is normal. And for some of us, myself included, this is very uncomfortable. We're not used to dissenting. We don't like conflict or causing trouble, but our voice matters. And it is easier when we remember that we are not alone. So let us be brave enough to wade in. Let us join hands with those beside us and lift one another when the current swells. And let us rise, not in fear, but in fierce love. Let us be the ones that we have been waiting for.